Amplitude's Humankind Lucy OpenDev is officially over with several streams under the old belt and a handful of side campaigns as well. It's time to get back into my Critique to the Devs series. These videos are designed with a few objectives in mind. First is to create an open form of communication for the developers to see video footage of critiques I have with builds or the game in general. Second, it's designed to let the community have their commentary on what was said or the things they've seen in their own time playing. Lastly, it's a place where constructive criticism can occur, as comments are heavily moderated by myself to ensure that a positive experience is to be had, even if there are some very critical things to be discussed. I'll make this very clear though, this is not a bashing of the game in any sense. These open devs especially are designed for feedback and analysis. Any critical comments in this video are not intended to be malicious or belittle the game, the staff, or the company. Now, if you've already made up your mind and you haven't pre-ordered, I gotta plug in my NEXUS GG store, where you can both pre-order Humankind right now and also directly support this channel. While you're there, you can see other games that I have personally picked out for you to see, so head over there regardless and give it a check out. With all that in mind, Humankind, although incredibly fun, was far from perfect in this Lucy OpenDev build. In today's video, we'll focus heavily on a few key areas, wrapping up with some general questions and critiques that don't fall into the first two major areas. So without further ado, let's dive into my critique to the devs with Humanity's Lucy OpenDev. One of the most important parts of any game is the functionality and clarity of its UI or user interface. If a player cannot understand information or information is simply not shown, it makes it very difficult to grasp mechanics and enjoy the game. This is especially true in a 4X strategy game, where mechanics may be in-depth or be crucial to know how to play. Humankind throughout its development has both struggled and evolved with each build to balance this, yet there was a lot to be desired with Lucy OpenDev. Diplomacy was one of the biggest struggles throughout my entire time playing, and I watched several other streamers and YouTubers go through the same frustration. The war negotiations were especially rough to comprehend at first. Only through experimentation and a few save reloads did I figure out exactly what I was doing. The lack of information on this screen makes it very hard to know what you're going to get with these negotiations, as the only real info we have is that the main actual city costs more than the territories attached to it. It's a guessing game when I select territories on this screen, and it would be immensely helpful at a minimum to get a tooltip or a parentheses stating what's a city, what's territory, and what I'm getting with that. Things like strategic or luxury resources would be great information on a territory, maybe info on the city like population or number of districts, wonders, etc., etc. Having to guess at what you're getting in something as important as war negotiations is some risky business. Another piece of diplomacy that would make a nice change is showing the player the likelihood of acceptance. I had a friendly relationship with an AI in one campaign, one Quill 18. We were both trading, we had solid treaties, but no matter what, they would not accept an alliance. Proposing any treaty variation or even pressing a demand should have some sort of acceptance bar, especially if a denial causes an actual change in the AI's opinion of you, which I believe this game does. This system is present in newer Total War games with a low, medium, and high text display, with 3 kingdoms pulling it off best in the form of a positive or negative number showing the chance of acceptance. These systems specifically require other forms of negotiations, of which I'll address later in the video. Menu breakdowns is another shortcoming which can be easily fixed. Despite influence and money being your primary spendable resources in the game, the main map breakdowns of contributions are not present, at least not in detail. Currently, money simply has 2 line items, money from cities and money from vassals. Influence still just has an overall influence, and that's it. However, it's in the cities themselves that the larger, more detailed breakdowns occur for money, which I believe need to be in some form mimicked in the main campaign breakdown. It doesn't need to be so extensive as to copy line by line, but when I hover over my total money income, it would be great to see that, okay, 200 money is generated from all my districts, 50 from resources, 100 from trade routes, etc., etc. Oh, and a quick note here, Trade route revenue either isn't implemented properly in this build or wasn't at all. I'm paying 300 gold to another AI for the saffron luxury resource, but I only get 1 gold per turn from a trade route someone else is buying off of me. Something doesn't add up. Anyways, back to breakdowns. Influence and even religion need these same line items, as they aren't implemented on a city scale either. Influence pushes your culture. Religion generation pushes it outward as well. We just need to know the breakdown to see where we need to buck up production or scale back from. Tooltips go right along with UI obviously, but there are quite a few pieces of UI that had no description when you hovered over their icon. The badges on the diplomacy screen, I know they mean something important, but there's nothing that reveals what they are. Your society's ideological spectrum, i.e. tradition versus progress, authority versus liberty. They were definitely labeled when you hovered over them in the last build. This time they're gone. I understand that these pieces may not have been part of the focus of the scenario that were considered important, or maybe they're being worked on and were just cut out for this build. But it's pieces like this that disrupt the learning ability of new players that I hope we see fixed in the next OpenDev. And I know I was not the only one a bit put off by the lack of tooltip descriptions in this one. The last area of critique for this section is in notifications. Notifications were a critique of mine from the very first time playing, and they have definitely evolved in design nicely, from a huge sidebar menu on the right hand side to its very nicely compact and expandable menu down on the bottom. It's what we're being notified of that's a bit of an issue in some areas of the game, namely during war. Currently, there are no notifications when your opponent hits 0 war desire and is ready to give up. Neither is there anything notifying you when your own war desire hits 0. Suddenly you're just not in a war anymore, and anything you've conquered is back in the opponent's hands. I enjoy the war desire mechanic. It's a unique way to give you an idea on the progression of said war. It's incredibly frustrating though when you end the turn and suddenly a war is over and you have not a single clue as to what happened. With all that being said, in terms of UI design, it's fantastic. The options we have to expand and compact information, the amount of screen it does or does not take up, UX menu design and tooltips that are there currently, it's all very well crafted and balanced. This feels like a very solid evolution from Endless Legend and Endless Space 2, and it fits very well into its historical theme that Humankind is going for. Part of every pre-release test build is going to have balance as one of its primary goals, and for good reason. If difficulty settings are too far apart, you'll potentially lose players to boredom or frustration. Units or cultures may become too overpowered, or things just get too wonky and could honestly potentially cause game crashes. Lucy OpenDev has some pretty serious game balance issues in several areas, and while it didn't ruin the game for me, it created extremely wild variations to my campaigns, and I know of several streamers who started over on their own campaigns because of them. Starting with difficulty, it seemed pretty bugged in this build. Normal was fairly easy to play on, with little to no difficulty keeping pace with other civs in any field of gameplay. Serious? Well, the hardest one in the field was, well, it was messed up. When campaigned with this difficulty, I saw the AI in some serious lethargic states, where they didn't push to get new territories, or a handful didn't even settle down at all the entire game. They didn't build armies or progress their cities much. It reminded me of a certain scene from Serenity.
The people here stopped fighting. And then they stopped everything else.
However, start over on another campaign on the same difficulty, I had the AI pressing on my cities with spearmen by turn 20, pressing into the next era before I had 3 to 4 era stars myself, and being so overly aggressive that I couldn't get any sort of treaty signed before the other factions pressed their demands so quickly I suddenly had 3 factions at war with me in the space of 2 turns. I'm not quite sure what was going on with the serious difficulty, but it was a bit of a mess, and you weren't sure if you were going to get Teletubbies for neighbors or the Terminator. One of the biggest game imbalances were the HUNS and the MONGOLs, the HUNS in particular for a couple of reasons. Both HUN and Mongol units are extremely overpowered. A unit that can move a pretty huge distance, shoot, move a huge distance again, and shoot again is absolutely absurd in the eras that they are in. Combined with the fact they multiply when killing troops, I had a single HUN army that took on multiple armies at the same time and won, which then multiplied into a full Hun army I could split and destroy the world. The solution, I believe here, is to A, limit their ability to move, attack, and then move or attack, or straight remove that second attack, and B, scale that food requirement way up to where it takes multiple battles to spawn more pew pew ponies, because goodness gracious, they are massively exploitable. The other problem with the Hun is the cultures that they are paired with. In one campaign, I chose the Greeks because the Huns were already taken. Their specialty unit is obviously the hoplite, with the Huns being their horse archers. I went up against a single horseman in a war with 4 hoplites of my own. They got owned, wrecked, completely destroyed without doing much harm to the horse archer. Here's the problem, and I'm honestly not quite sure how to solve it. Hoplites historically were last used sometime in the 330s BC. Hunnic horse archers are most prominently seen in the mid-400s AD. That is a ballpark 700 to 800 year difference between units, which to me causes a huge balance issue. In regards to technological advancement, that's a massive gap to be seen in the same era. I don't really know how to solve this because what I would do is just remove the Huns. They are too late of a major civilization for the classic era, but they are also too early for the medieval era. But at this point in development, you can't just remove an entire civilization from the game. After thinking on this a bit and coming back to this section of the script, HForHavoc has an idea. Reduce the ability of the horse archers somehow with the Huns, and let the Mongols be that next level up. They are quite literally the same civilization, just in different eras, so let the Huns be more primitive in some aspect somehow, nerf them in a way that they become evenly powered among the other classic era civs, and therefore potentially more balanced. Not sure how the execution of that would work, but something really does need to change in regard to game balance. The last section of game balance that's a major player for me lies in the city resource generation, i.e. food, industry, money, science, and influence. Food as it sits right now works on production tiers, with abundance being the highest tier where your population is generated the quickest. With an administrator in your city, food production only needs to be at 50 per turn to reach abundance, and regardless of the population in that city, stays at 50. By the end of one of my campaigns, having only built 2 farm districts and all of the constructibles, I was raking in over 700 food per turn with a population of over 40, which, yes, I understand that's not very high compared to some people who've exploited it, was 50 food per turn. Food requirements need to scale with population. What that magical number is, I can't say, but it's feasible to reach abundance tier without ever building a farm the entire game, and that's just not right, nor is it balanced. I can crank out 1 pot per turn by the end game as well, which could lead to some crazy huge cities. So maybe alongside that, military units start requiring more population as the eras progress. Not 100% on that second part, but I think it would go some distance towards balancing food. The other resources faced similar overpowered stats. With industry, I wasn't halfway through my campaign that I was one-turning about every single building, constructible, and unit in my main cities. Even wonders only took a few turns. Getting industry boosts on rivers, coasts, or types of terrain on top of or adjacent to buildings means steamrolling industry is not hard to accomplish currently. Money also isn't a problem, ever. I never built a single market district in the entire OpenDev and never struggled making money. I also never chose a culture that utilized the market districts because there were so few tiles that took advantage of a market district. The money you receive from trade agreements doesn't show, as I've mentioned, and the amount of money you get from vassals is off the charts, with no breakdown as to how that amount is determined. Influence is interesting as it's desperately needed in the early game, but in the late game, when you're making a ton of it, there's not a lot to spend your influence on. The cost of absorbing outposts into your cities goes up for sure, and so do wonders, but the generation of influence late game makes up for the amount spent very quickly, and at one point, my influence-based culture was able to culture bomb Quill every single turn, quickly and efficiently overwhelming him with my cut-off genes and dad bod physique culture. Science is probably the most balanced of all the resources in this game. There are a few exceptions, but there's also one caveat. In my opinion, the rate you accumulate science after all era techs are researched needs to be severely reduced to encourage next era progression. I hung out in an era for a decent number of turns to max out my era stars, naturally, and on progressing to the next one unlocked about 8 technologies right off the bat, which flung me forward immensely against the surrounding AI. A reduced rate ensures you'll still see progress into the next era, but not too much to make it overpowered. I enjoy the mechanics behind all the resources. They are very well thought out and utilize terrain, technologies, districts, and constructibles to their fullest extent. The issue I saw across every campaign was that steamrolling occurred in almost every instance, especially with industry, money, and influence. The only solution I can think of is to just up the cost of everything, but that's too general to just work. Maybe some scaling needs to occur as the eras progress. I'm not too sure what the right solution is, but let me know what you think about the resources and other balance issues that you saw while playing. This last section I'll dub general feedback, as they don't really fit in the bigger sections, but they are still very relevant for the video and for discussion. Some of these may actually just be questions that I hope the developer answers. It's a hodgepodge of miscellaneous items, basically. Let's begin with alliance treaties. I'm not sure how many people attempted alliances, but there's an entirely new set of treaties available to those who have them, from reduced and free trade to culture and research sharing, even military aid. Aside from the military vision though, none of the other treaties seem to work. Free trade means it costs me nothing to get my allies' resources, but they still get paid full price. Yep, I had to still actually spend money to buy them. I didn't notice a bump in science research or anything cultural either. My guess is that alliance mechanics weren't fully implemented in this build, which is a shame because I think the options in an alliance fit perfectly for the game. Rolling with diplomacy, one thing that was sorely lacking was haggling, or at least influencing, the AI. There were no options to sweeten a deal from the start, just a give me 100 gold and I'll agree demand counterpoint. I'd love to be able to entice an alliance with a resource an AI doesn't have, or throw my massive pile of gold at someone to make them like me more, things like that. You'll add a very simple but fun level of strategy to Humankind if you can interact more with the AI. The military part of Humankind could use some serious love and attention in about all areas of the game as well. Retreating armies are the most frustrating part of this. I'm all for an army being able to retreat, but when an army does, it removes the rest of the points away from your own army, regardless of how many moves you have left. On top of that, a retreating army is able to move halfway across the continent, it seems, which is a bit much. Taking away movement points limits alternate plans in the instance of a retreat, and I think it should be removed entirely. If you want to make that retreating army out of reach, that bugs me, but it's an okay solution so long as I can still move that attacking army to somewhere else, or at least pursue them if I wanted to. I also remember at one point that there was an army cap, and generals as well. What happened to them? Why were they removed? With the steamrolling resources at the moment, the unreal ability to produce a citizen every turn, and the whole tribal split spam you can do at the beginning of the game, an army cap would go a very long way to balance some of the issues I've already mentioned. I'd be on board with technology or certain milestones that increase army caps in a heartbeat. And as for generals, I think they'd be a great addition to boost attack or increase a specific army's number of units, things like that. It'd be really interesting to know why all that's changed. Lastly with armies is the AI's ability to strategize. In my time playing Lucy OpenDev, I've seen too many battles where the AI simply runs at me to try and kills my units with no regard to the fact that
it's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Or that they are defending and I can't really take them on, but they'll come at me anyways. This can definitely be fixed. These are just balance bug issues, AI movement, and it's something I look forward to seeing better implemented in the future. Battles were still enjoyable in spite of that, and I can see how in the last eras they will be truly massive and enjoyable as technologies progress and armies get larger. Alright, so that's 6 pages of critique in the bag. But what is my overall opinion of Humankind's Lucy OpenDev? I really enjoyed it actually. I probably played through 10 to 12 campaigns, not all to turn 150, but all through the 4 eras we were allowed to play through. Most of the civilizations have very appealing attributes about them, and it was extremely fun to utilize different combinations. While I role-played several, what I found most interesting is that each civilization created a different playthrough for me, naturally, every single time, and that my civ choice in the next era was heavily dictated by what I had built in the previous. Settling in a territory with lots of river tiles, I naturally picked like the Harapons for their food. Several makers' quarters later, and I chose the Aztec for their industry exploits, which led to the Mongols because I had multiple wars to fight at the same time. The progression of the game feels very smooth and natural, which is something I wanted to really test for this scenario. Never did I feel awkward choosing a completely different type of culture when going into the next era. The architectural shift is well done and creates a really cool layer of culturing that is recognizable across all factions. The units are varied enough to be unique, aside from the naturally close civs like HUNS and the Mongols, Aztecs and the Mayans, and I never got tired of being one civilization when I played. I love that we got to play so much of the game, and it will be interesting to see what progress has been made with the next OpenDev. That will be all for my Humankind critique to the devs video. Especially with these videos, your comments are highly encouraged, with either comments on my feedback or feedback of your own. Let me know what your thoughts of the OpenDev were, which civilizations you played as, did you find similar balance or UI issues, were there issues you saw that I didn't mention, etc, etc. Be sure to share this video on the World Wide Web as well. I would love to give the devs some solid feedback with this video. Hope you enjoyed this, whether you agreed with it or not. Don't forget you can pre-order right now on my NEXUS GG store. Thank you very much for watching. This is Havoc, and I will see you in the next one.